The repair shop sat in the darkest corner of Transit Station Gamma, squeezed between a food stall that smelled like burnt plastic and an empty storage room that nobody had opened in years. Most people walked past without noticing the faded sign that read Cole's Repairs, Everything Fixed. David Cole liked it that way. Fewer customers meant fewer headaches, and at 40 years old he had enough headaches to last a lifetime. He was elbow deep in a broken cooling unit when he heard the door chime. David swore under his breath and pulled his arm out, wiping grease on his already filthy work pants. He looked up and saw nothing at first. Then he heard a small voice, high-pitched and frantic. "Please, please, you must help." David leaned over his workbench and spotted a small Quilvan child standing in his doorway. The insectoid species barely reached his knee, with 4 thin arms and large compound eyes that reflected the shop's dim lights. The child was holding something wrapped in a torn cloth, clutching it like a precious treasure. "Shop's about to close, kid," David said, not unkindly. He had learned a dozen alien languages over the years, but the Quilvan spoke through a small translation device hanging around her neck. The mechanical voice made everything sound flat and emotionless, but David could hear the desperation underneath. "My brother," the child said, her antenna drooping. "His toy. Grandmother's toy, it broke. He cries every night. Mother says nobody can fix it. But vendor at market said you fix impossible things." David sighed. He was tired. His back hurt. He wanted to close up shop, grab something to eat, and sleep for 12 hours. But something about the way the child held that bundle made him pause. It reminded him of his sister years ago, clutching her favorite stuffed animal after their parents died. "Let me see it," he said. The child unwrapped the cloth with trembling hands. Inside was a mechanical dragon, small enough to fit in David's palm. It was beautiful once, he could tell. Someone had crafted it with incredible care, but now it was a mess. One wing hung at an odd angle, cracked down the middle. The metal body was covered in corrosion, green and black spots eating through the surface. The joints were frozen solid, and when David picked it up, something rattled inside like broken glass. "This is really old," David said, turning it over carefully. The metal felt strange under his fingers, not like anything he had worked with before. The craftsmanship was amazing, though. Tiny gears, delicate joints, intricate patterns carved into every scale. "I mean really, really old." "Where did your grandmother get this?" "Don't know," the child said. "She had it when she came to station. Long time ago. Before I was born, before Mother was born. She gave to my brother before she died. He loves it. Sleeps with it every night, until it stopped working." David set the dragon down on his workbench and studied it under his lamp. Any normal mechanic would call this garbage. The corrosion alone would take days to clean. The wing would need to be completely rebuilt. And whatever power source this thing used, it was definitely dead. But David saw something else. He saw the love that went into making this. Every tiny scale was unique. Every joint was positioned with perfect precision. Someone had spent months, maybe years, creating this toy. They had put their heart into it. "I don't have money," the child said quietly. She held up one small hand, and David saw a single crystal bead resting in her palm. It was pretty, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the workbench. "This is all I have, please. My brother cries so much." David should have said no. He should have explained that his time was worth more than a pretty bead. He should have told her to take the dragon to a museum, not a repair shop. Instead, he took the bead and dropped it into his pocket. "I'll try," he said. "Can't promise anything. This thing is in bad shape, but I'll try." The child's antenna perked up immediately. She made a sound that the translator didn't bother converting, but David figured it was happy. She thanked him 3 times, gave him a contact code, and scurried out of the shop before he could change his mind. David picked up the dragon again and carried it to his main workbench. He cleared away the cooling unit and set up his brightest lamp. For a long moment he just looked at the toy, turning it slowly in his hands. "Okay, little guy," he said out loud. He always talked to himself when he worked alone. 20 years of solitude did that to a person. "Let's see what's wrong with you." He grabbed his smallest screwdriver and started looking for access panels. The dragon's belly had tiny screws, almost invisible against the scaled pattern. David had to use his magnifying visor to see them properly. When he finally got the panel open, he whistled low. Inside was a mess. Corrosion had eaten through half the internal components. Gears had literally turned to powder. Wires had fused together into useless lumps. And in the center, barely visible, was a power core unlike anything David had ever seen. It looked like a tiny crystal, similar to the bead the child had given him, but this one pulsed with a faint internal light. What the hell kind of battery is this? David muttered. He had no idea. But that was okay. Figuring out impossible problems was what he did best. David pulled out his toolkit and got to work. He would need to fabricate new gears, clean every surface, rebuild the wing from scratch, and somehow figure out how to make that strange power core work again. It would take days, maybe a week, but he would do it. In the corner of his shop, hidden behind a stack of broken parts, a small maintenance drone's camera lens focused on David's workbench. It had been there for 3 days, watching and waiting. Now it began recording every movement David made, every word he spoke, every careful touch of his tools against the ancient metal. Far away, someone was paying very close attention to what happened in this forgotten repair shop. But David Cole had no idea he was being watched. He only cared about fixing a broken toy for a sad child. That was enough. 3 days had passed since the Quilvan child brought the broken dragon to David's shop. 3 days of careful, painstaking work that tested every skill David had learned in 20 years of fixing things. The first day, he had simply cleaned. Every surface of the dragon was covered in corrosion, the green and black crud that ate through metal like acid. David used chemical baths, soft brushes, and more patience than he knew he had. He worked slowly, talking to the dragon as he cleaned each tiny scale. "Sorry if this stings," he said, dipping a brush in solvent. "I know it's not comfortable, but we need to get this junk off you. Can't fix what I can't see." He knew it was stupid to talk to a broken toy, but it helped him focus, and besides, nobody was around to judge him. The shop was closed. No customers interrupted. Just David and his work. By the end of day 1, the dragon looked better. The metal underneath the corrosion was beautiful, a mix of copper and silver that David still couldn't identify. But the internal damage was worse than he thought. When he finally got a clear look inside, his heart sank. "Oh, you're really messed up, aren't you?" David said softly. 14 gears had completely disintegrated. The wing joint was cracked in 3 places. Every wire had corroded through, and that strange crystal power core sat in the center of it all, barely glowing like a dying ember. Day 2 was about fabrication. David didn't have replacement parts. Whatever civilization made this dragon was long gone, or at least nowhere near Transit Station Gamma, so he had to make everything from scratch. He started with the gears. Using his microlathe, he cut 14 new gears from a high-grade alloy he kept for special projects. Each gear took an hour to make. They had to be perfect, exactly the right size, exactly the right tooth count. One mistake and the whole mechanism would jam. "This one's for you," David said, holding up a gear smaller than his fingernail. "Took me 6 tries to get it right. You better appreciate this." He installed each gear carefully, testing the movement after each one. Slowly, the dragon's internal mechanism came back to life. When David turned a tiny key on the dragon's back, he heard clicking. Not smooth yet, but clicking. Progress. The wires were next. David had to run new connections from the power core to every joint, every light node, every moving part. It was like performing surgery on something the size of an apple. His hands cramped. His eyes hurt from staring through the magnifying visor, but he kept working. "Almost there," he muttered, connecting the last wire to the dragon's left eye socket. "Just need to get your power sorted out and you'll be good as new." Well, almost. Day 3 started with the wing. This was the hardest part. The original wing material was something David had never encountered. It was flexible but strong, translucent but reflective, lighter than paper but tougher than steel. He had nothing in his shop that came close. David spent 4 hours just staring at the broken wing, thinking. He tried 6 different materials. All of them failed. Too brittle, too heavy, wrong color, wrong flexibility. He was about to give up when he remembered a polymer he had invented 3 years ago for a completely different project. He mixed the base components in careful ratios, added a metallic dust for color, and created a thin sheet. When he held it up to the light, it caught the glow and shimmered just like the original wing. "Not perfect," David said, comparing the new material to the old wing, "but it'll work. You'll be able to fly again, sort of, in your mechanical dragon way." He cut the polymer to match the original wing's shape, then used a heat gun to carefully attach it to the broken frame. The join was visible if you looked close, but the wing held. When David tested the movement, it folded and unfolded smoothly. Now came the scary part, the power core. David had spent all 3 days avoiding this. The crystal core was technology he didn't understand. It should have been completely dead after all this time, but it still glowed faintly, like it was holding on to life by pure stubbornness. He cleaned the connections around the core with steady hands. Corrosion had built up on every contact point, blocking the flow of whatever energy this thing used. David scraped and cleaned until the contacts shone like new metal. Then he held his breath and activated the core. Nothing happened. David's heart sank. All this work and the dragon would stay dead because he couldn't figure out the power source. "Come on," he said quietly. "Don't do this to me. That kid needs you to work. Her little brother cries every night. You're important to them. So wake up." He tapped the crystal gently, checked the connections again, adjusted the tiny prongs that held the core in place. Still nothing. David sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted. 3 days of work, barely any sleep, and for what? A dead toy that would never work again. Then he noticed something. The crystal core pulsed a little brighter when he talked. "Just a tiny bit, but it was there. You can hear me?" David said, leaning forward. The crystal pulsed again. That was impossible. Power cores didn't respond to sound. They were just batteries, dumb pieces of technology that stored and released energy. They didn't listen, but this one seemed to be listening. David talked to it. He explained what he had done, how he had cleaned and repaired every part of the dragon. He told the crystal about the Quilvan child and her brother. He promised that if the core would just work again, the dragon would be loved and cared for. The crystal's glow grew stronger. David's breath caught. He watched as light spread through the crystal, brighter and brighter until it was blazing like a tiny star. Energy flowed through the wires David had installed. The dragon's eyes lit up, glowing amber. The gears turned smoothly, clicking into place. The wings stretched out, the new one moving just as well as the original. Then the dragon opened its tiny jaws and let out a soft, mechanical roar. David laughed. He actually laughed, something he hadn't done in months. The sound echoed through his empty shop, bouncing off walls covered in broken parts and half-finished projects. "You're alive," he said, grinning like an idiot. "You actually work." The dragon turned its head to look at him. Its amber eyes focused on his face. Then it folded its wings and settled onto the workbench, looking content. David carefully placed the dragon in a padded box. Tomorrow the Quilvan child would come to pick it up. She would be so happy. Her brother would stop crying, that was all that mattered. In the corner of the shop, the hidden maintenance drone captured every moment of the repair, every word David spoke, every gentle touch of his hands. The drone's processor marked this footage as critical priority and prepared to transmit it across the galaxy. Someone very powerful had just watched a human do the impossible, and they were very, very interested. 2 weeks had passed since David fixed the dragon toy. The Quilvan child had picked it up, her antenna vibrating with joy when she saw it working. She had paid him with that single crystal bead, and David had watched her scurry away with the dragon held carefully in her arms. That was that. Another job done. David had moved on to other projects, a broken water filter for a Hravian trader, a malfunctioning door lock for station security, the usual boring stuff that paid the bills and kept him occupied. He was working on a busted communication device when he heard unusual sounds outside his shop. Heavy footsteps. Lots of them. Then voices, low and urgent. David frowned and looked up from his workbench. Through his dirty shop window he saw people running. Merchants closing their stalls. Security guards moving into formation. Something big was happening. David wiped his hands and walked to his door. He opened it and stuck his head out, looking down the corridor. A crowd had gathered about 50 meters away, everyone staring at something David couldn't see. "What's going on?" he asked a passing Hravian. "Important ship docked," the alien said, his translator making his voice sound nervous. "Very important." Station master himself went to greet them. "Who is it?" But the Hravian had already hurried away, disappearing into his shop and slamming the security shutters down. David shrugged and went back inside. Whatever political nonsense was happening, it had nothing to do with him. He was just a mechanic in a forgotten corner of the station. Important people didn't visit places like this. He picked up his tools and returned to the communication device. 2 minutes later, his door opened. David looked up, ready to tell whoever it was that he was busy. Then the words died in his throat. Standing in his doorway was something David had only seen in history books. A Dravaxian, tall, at least 7 feet, with scales that shifted between gold and red like liquid metal. Four eyes arranged in two pairs, both sets focused directly on David. Four arms, two clasped in front, two hanging relaxed at his sides. He wore robes that probably cost more than David's entire shop, deep purple with silver threading that seemed to move on its own. Behind the Dravaxian stood two guards in powered armor, weapons clearly visible but not aimed at anyone. Yet, the Dravaxian had to duck to enter David's shop. When he straightened up, his head nearly touched the ceiling. The air felt heavier somehow, like the alien's presence changed the atmosphere itself. David stood frozen, his wrench still in his hand. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Dravaxians were rare. More than rare. They were ancient, powerful, and they definitely didn't visit repair shops on backwater stations. "You are the mechanic who repaired the toy," the Dravaxian said. His voice was deep, rolling like distant thunder. He spoke perfect English, not using a translator. David noticed his lower eyes tracking every detail of the shop while his upper eyes remained locked on David's face. David said intelligently. "What toy?" "The dragon. Mechanical construction. Approximately 400 years old. You restored it to function 2 weeks ago." David's mind raced. 400 years old? The dragon was that ancient? How did this alien know about it? Why did he care? I fixed a toy dragon. For a Quilvan kid. Is there a problem? Did I break some law? The Dravaxian stepped further into the shop. His guards remained at the door, blocking it completely. David felt his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't scared exactly, but he wasn't not scared either. "My name is Historian Prince Wrath," the alien said. "That toy was crafted by my grandmother 417 years ago. It was lost during the Burning Crusade 304 years ago. I have been searching for it for 73 years. David nearly dropped his wrench. He stared at the Dravaxian, trying to process the numbers. 400 years. 300 years. 70 years. The scale was impossible to grasp. "I didn't know," David said weakly. "The kid just said it was her grandmother's. I thought maybe 50, 60 years old. Not 400. Wrath's scaled face did something that might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with alien expressions. "I placed monitoring systems across 12 systems," Wrath continued. "Sensors designed to detect my family's lost artifacts. When the Quilvan family registered the toy for a transit permit, my system flagged it immediately. I dispatched a surveillance drone to observe." He paused, all four eyes focusing on David with uncomfortable intensity. "I wanted to see if whoever possessed it understood its value, if they would treat it with respect or discard it as worthless junk." David's stomach dropped. "You were watching me?" "For 3 days, yes. The drone recorded everything. Every word you spoke. Every careful touch. Every decision you made. That's creepy as hell," David said before he could stop himself. To his surprise, Wrath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Perhaps, but necessary. Do you understand what you accomplished, human? That power core uses photon battery technology. It has been extinct for 200 years. Even Dravaxian masters cannot replicate it, yet you made it function." "I just cleaned the connections," David protested. "It wasn't that complicated." "You also fabricated 14 gears from scratch using primitive tools. You created a wing replacement from materials that should not have worked. And most importantly, you spoke to the toy with kindness. You treated it as if it mattered, even though you believed it was worthless." Wrath moved closer, and David resisted the urge to back away. The alien's presence was overwhelming but not threatening, more like standing next to something ancient and powerful, like a mountain or a star. "This tells me much about your character," Wrath said quietly. "You did not know the dragon's value, yet you treated it as priceless. You refused to compromise your craftsmanship for a child's toy. You worked for 3 days in exchange for a single bead because you cared about making a child happy." David didn't know what to say. He felt exposed, like this alien had seen into parts of his soul that David himself didn't examine too closely. "Okay," he said finally. "So you know I'm a decent guy. Great, why are you here?" Wrath's expression shifted into something that was definitely a smile now. "Because I have a proposal for you, David Cole. One that will change your life completely." David's grip tightened on his wrench. "I'm listening. I need your skills," Wrath said. "Not for toys. For something far more important." And with those words, David's small, comfortable, boring life started to shift in ways he could never have imagined. Wrath gestured with one of his upper hands, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. David watched as images appeared, spinning slowly in 3 dimensions. Ancient buildings, artifacts under glass, massive halls filled with objects from civilizations David didn't recognize. The Dravaxian Archives, Wrath explained. The largest repository of historical artifacts in the known galaxy. 12,000 species, 8 million years of recorded history. Technology, art, literature, science from every corner of explored space. The images were breathtaking. David saw weapons that looked like they belonged in fantasies. Machines that defied physics. Art so beautiful it hurt to look at. But he also noticed something else. Many of the objects looked damaged, corroded, broken. The archives are dying, Wrath said, and David heard genuine pain in his voice. Items deteriorate faster than we can preserve them. Technology fails. Mechanisms break down. We have scholars, yes. Historians who can tell you the name of every artifact, its origin, its significance. But we lack craftsmen. We lack people who can touch something broken and understand how to make it whole again. David tore his eyes away from the hologram and looked at Wrath. You have an entire civilization of advanced aliens. Surely you have mechanics. We have technicians who can repair modern equipment, Wrath corrected. But the archives contain technology from extinct species, from eras so ancient that all documentation has been lost. Our technicians look at these objects and see mysteries. You looked at my grandmother's dragon and saw a puzzle to solve. The hologram shifted, showing a workshop. Not like David's cluttered, dirty shop, but a pristine space with equipment that looked like it cost more than a small planet. I am offering you a position as Master Restorer of the Dravaxian Archives, Wrath said. You would have unlimited resources. The finest tools in the galaxy, access to artifacts that most people will never see. You would work with scholars from hundreds of species, all dedicated to preserving the past. David felt his mouth go dry. It was the kind of offer he would have dreamed about if he had let himself dream. But he was practical. He knew better than to trust things that seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? He asked. Wrath's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which David was starting to recognize as surprise. You assume there is a catch? There's always a catch. Nothing's free, especially not something this big. The catch, as you say, is that you would leave this station, leave your shop, come to work at the archives, which are located in Dravaxian territory, 16 light-years from here. The work would be demanding, the expectations high, and you would be the only human among thousands of aliens. David looked around his shop. 20 years he had spent here. 20 years of fixing broken appliances for ungrateful customers. 20 years of being alone, keeping his head down, staying safe but empty. I need to think about it, David said. Wrath nodded, as if he had expected this. I will give you 30 hours. 1 station cycle. After that, my ship departs, and this opportunity departs with it. He turned to leave, his guards moving aside to let him pass. But then he stopped and looked back at David. There is one more thing, Wrath said. The Quilvan child. I have purchased the dragon from her family for a substantial sum. Enough to secure their comfort for 3 generations. But I made them a promise in your name. David felt a cold feeling in his stomach. What promise? That you would create a new toy for the child. Something equally special. Something made by your hands, carrying your craft, not just my grandmother's memory. You told them I'd make a toy, without asking me first? Yes, Wrath said simply. Because I believe you will do it regardless of whether you accept my offer. Because that is who you are. With that, the Dravaxian left. His guards followed. The door closed behind them, and David was alone in his shop again. For a long moment, he just stood there holding his wrench, staring at the space where the hologram had been. His mind was spinning. Master Restorer. Dravaxian Archives. 16 light-years away. Unlimited resources. Leave everything behind. He sat down heavily in his work chair and put his head in his hands. The smart move was to say no. Stay here, stay safe. Keep fixing broken appliances until he got too old to work. Then retire on whatever meager savings he had managed to scrape together. Die alone in a small room on a space station nobody cared about. The thought made him sick, but the alternative terrified him. What if he wasn't good enough? What if the dragon repair had been luck? What if he got to the archives and failed, couldn't restore anything important, proved to be just a mediocre mechanic from a backwater station? David spent the next few hours trying to work. He picked up the communication device, but his hands were shaking too much to hold the small components. He tried to organize his tools, but kept losing track of what he was doing. Finally, he gave up and left the shop. He walked the station corridors for hours, up to the observation decks where he could see ships coming and going, down to the lower levels where families lived in cramped quarters, through the markets where merchants sold goods from 100 worlds. He watched people, aliens and humans, all living their lives, some happy, some miserable, most just existing, going through the motions, surviving. Was that what he wanted? To just survive? He thought about his sister. She had died 15 years ago, back on Earth, from a disease that could have been cured if they had more money. David had left Earth after that, unable to stay in a place that reminded him of her. He had drifted from station to station until he ended up here, where he had stayed because it was easier than moving again. His sister had always told him he wasted his talent, that he could do amazing things if he just tried. He had ignored her, played it safe, kept his head down, and where had that gotten him? A dingy shop and a life so small he could hold it in one hand. David found himself back at his shop near the end of the 30 hours. He opened the door and looked at his workbench, at the tools he had collected over 20 years, at the half-finished projects scattered everywhere. Then he pulled out his personal communicator and called Wrath. "I'll do it," David said when the Dravaxian answered. "But I have conditions." "Name them," Wrath replied, and David could hear satisfaction in his voice. "I keep the shop, as a side project, a place where anyone can get things fixed no matter how poor they are." "Agreed. I want to train apprentices, share what I know, no hoarding knowledge." "Agreed. And I'm making that toy for the Quilven kid before I leave. Doesn't matter how long it takes." "Agreed." David took a deep breath. "Then I accept your offer." "Excellent. I will make arrangements. Take the time you need for the toy. We will wait." David ended the call and looked around his shop one more time. Then he smiled. Really smiled for the first time in years. Time to build something special. David spent a week planning before he touched a single tool. He researched Quilven culture, their mythology, their history. He learned that the starbird was sacred to them, a creature that supposedly guided their ancestors across space to find their homeworld. It was a symbol of hope and guidance, perfect for a child's toy. He sketched designs on old paper, something he rarely did. Usually he just dove in and figured things out as he went. But this was different. This toy mattered, not because a powerful alien was watching, but because a child needed something special to hold on to. The design evolved over dozens of drafts. The starbird would be larger than the dragon, about the size of a small house cat. It would have articulated wings that could fold and unfold smoothly, crystal nodes along its body that would catch light and glow softly. And it would sing, a gentle melody based on traditional Quilven songs he found in the station's database. On day 3, he started building. The frame came first. David used a titanium alloy, strong but lightweight. He shaped it by hand, heating and bending the metal into the bird's basic skeleton. It took 6 hours just to get the spine right, the curve that would let the bird's neck move naturally. "You're going to be beautiful," David said to the half-formed frame. "That little kid is going to love you." The wings were the biggest challenge. They needed to be delicate but strong, capable of folding completely flat against the body or spreading wide. David created a joint system using micro ball bearings and flexible carbon fiber struts. Each wing had 7 segments that moved independently but worked together smoothly. He tested the movement over and over, making tiny adjustments until the wings flowed like water. The crystal nodes were next. David didn't have access to the same technology as the ancient dragon's power core, but he had something better: photoreactive crystals that absorbed ambient light and released it slowly as a soft glow. He embedded 12 of them along the bird's body, positioning them where they would catch the most light. When he finished, the starbird glimmered even in his shop's dim lighting. Day 5 was for the internal mechanisms. The bird needed to move on its own, not just be posed. David installed a small motor system powered by a standard energy cell, the kind you could buy anywhere. No mysterious ancient technology that would be impossible to replace. When this toy eventually broke, any mechanic could fix it. The motor controlled the head movement, the wing articulation, and the tail feathers. David programmed simple behavior patterns. The bird would occasionally stretch its wings, turn its head as if looking around, and ruffle its feathers when touched. But the most important part was the song. David wasn't a musician. He could barely carry a tune, but he spent hours listening to Quilvan music, trying to understand the patterns, the rhythms that would sound right to Quilvan ears. He synthesized a melody using software, adjusting frequencies until it sounded gentle and soothing. Then he embedded the sound system inside the bird's chest, behind protective plating. When activated, the starbird would sing its soft song, a lullaby for a child who cried at night. Day 7, David added the final touches. He painted the frame with metallic pigments that shifted between silver and blue, matching descriptions of the mythological starbird. He etched patterns into the metal, geometric designs from Quilvan art. He polished every surface until the bird gleamed. Finally, he installed the eyes. 2 small cameras linked to a basic AI that let the bird track movement and turn to face whoever was nearby. The eyes glowed with a warm amber light, the same color as the dragon's eyes had been. David stepped back and activated the completed toy. The starbird came to life smoothly. Its head turned, looking around the shop. The wings spread slowly, crystal nodes glowing softly. Then it began to sing, the gentle melody filling the space. David felt his throat tighten. The toy was more than he had hoped for. It was genuinely beautiful, something that honored both his craft and the Quilvan culture. A child would treasure this. A child would feel loved holding this. He carefully deactivated the bird and placed it in a protective case. Then he contacted the Quilvan family. They arrived an hour later. The mother, the small girl who had first brought him the dragon, and a tiny boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old in human terms. The boy's eyes were red and his antenna drooped sadly. David opened the case and showed them the starbird. The reaction was immediate. The boy's antenna shot straight up. His eyes went wide. He made a sound that the translator converted to pretty, but didn't capture the pure joy in his voice. "This is for you," David said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "It's a starbird like in your people's stories. It will sing to you when you're sad. It will keep you company at night. And if it ever breaks, any mechanic can fix it. I made sure of that." He activated the toy. The starbird spread its wings, crystals glowing. It turned its head to look at the boy and began to sing. The little boy reached out with trembling hands. David placed the starbird gently in his arms. The boy hugged it close, and the toy adapted, folding its wings protectively around him while continuing its song. The mother was crying. So was the sister. They thanked David in rapid Quilvan, the words tumbling over each other too fast for the translator to keep up. David understood anyway. "Take care of it," he said, "and take care of each other." The family left, the boy still clutching his starbird, its song fading as they walked down the corridor. David stood in his empty shop and wiped his eyes. He wasn't crying. Just dust in the air, that's all. Wrath appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, as if he had been waiting nearby. "That was exceptional work," the Dravaxian said quietly. "You gave that child more than a toy. You gave him comfort, security, love made tangible." David shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just a toy." "No," Wrath said firmly. "It is craft raised to art. It is function merged with caring. It is exactly what the archives need, what the galaxy needs." He extended one hand toward David. "Are you ready to begin?" David looked around his shop one last time. 20 years of his life contained in this small space. But it was time to move forward. Time to matter in a bigger way. He took Wrath's hand. "Yeah," David said. "I'm ready." The journey to the Dravaxian archives took 3 days through quantum slip space, a form of travel that made David's stomach feel like it was turning inside out. He spent most of the trip in his assigned quarters, trying not to throw up and questioning every decision that led him here. But when Wrath's ship dropped back into normal space, and David got his first look at the archives, every doubt evaporated. The structure was massive beyond comprehension. It orbited a gas giant moon, a geometric marvel that seemed to shift and change as David watched. Towers spiraled upward in patterns that hurt to follow. Transparent sections revealed chambers stacked on chambers, halls leading to more halls, storage areas that stretched for kilometers. "It houses the collected knowledge of 8 million years," Wrath said, standing beside David at the observation window. "Every major civilization that achieved space travel has contributed, some willingly, some through salvage after their extinction, all of it preserved here." David pressed his hand against the window. "It's incredible." It is a responsibility, Wrath corrected. And now partly yours. The ship docked at a private bay. David followed Wrath through corridors that were themselves works of art. Every wall displayed something historical. Fragments of ancient texts, holographic recreations of extinct species, samples of materials from dead worlds. They passed dozens of aliens, scholars from species David didn't recognize. All of them stopped to stare at him. David heard whispers following in his wake. They know about you, Wrath said. Word spreads quickly in academic circles. The human who repaired what was thought impossible. Great, David muttered. No pressure. Wrath led him to a massive workshop and David stopped in the doorway, stunned. The space was 3 times the size of his entire shop back on the station. Equipment lined the walls, tools he recognized and tools he had never seen before. Multiple workbenches, each designed for different scales of work. Storage units filled with materials from across the galaxy. And light. Beautiful natural light streaming through transparent sections of the ceiling. This is yours, Wrath said. Your workshop. I took the liberty of having your tools and belongings transported here. They should arrive within a few days. David walked into the space slowly, touching the workbenches, examining the tools. Everything was pristine. Perfect. Exactly what he would have dreamed of if he had let himself dream big. What do you want me to work on first? He asked. Wrath smiled and gestured. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a storage chamber beyond. Inside, David saw dozens of objects, each in its own protective case. These are items from Earth, Wrath explained, recovered from a destroyed colony 30 years ago. Most historians declared them too damaged to restore. They have been in storage since then, waiting for someone with the skill to attempt recovery. David approached the cases and looked at the objects inside. A music box, its mechanism frozen with age. A mechanical typewriter, keys jammed and ribbon dried out. A wind-up toy soldier, spring broken and paint faded. A pocket watch, crystal cracked and gears corroded. They were pieces of human history, not ancient like the dragon, but old enough that they represented a time before humanity spread to the stars, before everything became digital and disposable. These are from Earth? David asked, his voice rough. From the colony New Boston, yes. Settlers brought family heirlooms, pieces of home. When the colony was destroyed by a solar flare, these items were recovered from the ruins. They were deemed historically significant but unrestorable. David carefully opened one of the cases and picked up the music box. It was small, wooden, with a delicate painting on the lid showing a winter scene. He could imagine someone's grandmother carrying this across light years, treasuring it as a connection to a world left behind. I'll fix them, he said quietly. All of them. I have no doubt, Wrath said. Take your time. Learn the facility. Meet the other keepers. This is your home now. Over the next 3 months, David settled into his new life. He repaired the Earth artifacts first, working slowly and carefully. The music box was particularly challenging. The mechanism had been handcrafted in a style not used for 200 years. David had to research historical techniques, learn how music boxes were made before automation. When he finally got it working and the gentle melody played, half a dozen scholars who had been watching burst into spontaneous applause. Word of his success spread. Other keepers brought him projects they had given up on. A musical instrument from a species extinct for 10,000 years. David studied the surviving documentation, made educated guesses about how it should sound, and got it playing again. The sound it produced made 3 scholars cry. A data storage device from the first Dravaxian space mission, thought to be corrupted beyond recovery. David traced the connections, found where the data pathway had degraded and bridged the gap with a custom interface. The recovered files contained the personal logs of the mission commander, words that had been thought lost forever. But the most important change was how David worked. He started teaching. At first, a few curious scholars would watch him. Then more came. Young keepers, apprentices, students from a dozen species. They watched how David approached problems, how he thought through challenges, how he treated every object with respect regardless of its apparent value. David explained everything. His reasoning, his techniques, his instincts. He turned his solitary craft into a shared knowledge. Every broken thing wants to work again, he told his students. Your job is to listen to what it needs. Not what you think it needs, what it actually needs. The students started applying his methods. Success rates on restoration projects increased. Items that had been in storage for decades were brought out and repaired. The archives came back to life in ways it hadn't been in centuries. 6 months after arriving, David sat in his workshop late at night, working on a personal project. A small mechanical dragon, similar to the one that had started everything but his own design. He was making it as a gift for the Quilven boy, a companion to the Starbird. Wrath found him there, working by the light of his bench lamp. "You are content," Wrath observed. It wasn't a question. David looked up and nodded. "Yeah, I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters." "You preserve the past," Wrath said, settling into a chair nearby. "You ensure the future remembers how to value craftsmanship. My grandmother used to say that creation is the highest form of memory. You embody that principle." David turned back to his dragon, adjusting a tiny gear. "I just fix things." "No," Wrath said with absolute certainty. "You restore meaning. There is a profound difference." Outside the workshop windows, the archives continued their slow orbit, chambers glowing with preserved history. And in one small workshop, a human mechanic worked on a toy dragon, his hands steady, his purpose clear. In a galaxy of disposable technology and forgotten crafts, David Cole had found his place. Not because he was the smartest or the most skilled, but because he cared enough to fix what others would discard, because he saw value where others saw junk, because he treated everything, no matter how small, as if it mattered. And in the end, that made all the difference.